You're listening to Theater in College Hoops. I am Subi, back for another week. Alongside me, as always, Taylor Dammel. We're brought to you by Belly Up Media. Go download, subscribe, rate, and review us on whichever device it is that you use. Your college hooper of the day, I went with Walter White from BU, a pretty recent guy from BU, and I think he gained quite a bit of notoriety and fame in the college basketball landscape, obviously because of his name and it relating to Breaking Bad, yada, yada, yada. But that's not the biggest reason why I chose him for our college hooper of the day. We've lost some actors in Hollywood this week, and I'm going to get into why this week has actually over the last 2 years been a really bad week in terms of deaths. But in all seriousness, Paul Rubens, Pee Wee Herman, I don't know the age group or the age bracket of our listeners and the theater goers for the most part, but Taylor, you and we grew up with Pee Wee Herman, and so Paul Rubens actually went to BU, started off at Plymouth State, which is nearby, where I kind of close to where I grew up, a small school. Obviously, played Pee Wee Herman. Look, I'd be also remiss if I didn't say that he has that one little blotch on his career resume, but by and large, a well respected dude and a funny dude in that type of humor for us. So that's why I had to make the BU connection. I'm always in the summer days. I'm always trying to make some sort of connection with what's going on in the real world to our college hooper of the day. So Walter White, shout out to BU, not only produced White, but also Paul Rubens, aka Pee Wee Herman. Rest in peace. Check out the website at theaterincollegehoops.com and make sure to follow me at CBB Theater to find out where the theat is. You should also follow Taylor at Taylor Dammel. Let's open the curtains. All right, TD. Another week here back in the saddle. Not a lot going on in the college world except for realignment, something that we've all been waiting for, and teams leaving the god awful Pac 12. Now it concerns one of our schools, Arizona, obviously ASU as well, Utah. We're going to get to all of that, but I had said in the intro that this is a rough week in terms of death. Taylor, did you know this week last year we lost Bill Russell and also Vin Scully? This year, I had mentioned Pee Wee Herman off the top, Paul Rubens, but also very tragically and sad, Angus Cloud from the hit show Euphoria, aka Fez. I was shocked when I heard that news. Not making light of any of these passings. It's all very sad. Obviously, last year, I'd even written in my journal.
Sinead O'Connor.
When was that?
Within the last week. Yeah, end of last
Wow.
week. Yeah.
Did I miss that? Jeez. Yeah, incredibly sad. So I would put Sinead O'Connor, Bill Russell, and Vince Scully in the group of damn, we're getting old. Pee Wee Herman, I don't know necessarily if he fits that bill, but Angus Cloud on the complete end of the opposite end of that spectrum, 25. Late July, early August is a sketchy time the last couple of years, I guess.
Yeah, not ideal really for celebrities, musicians, actors here. Is it I don't want to sound insensitive because that's not where I'm going with this, but I guess as we get older, you just become less sensitive to this stuff because you realize that everybody that you and I'm not trying to take anything away from all of this, right? It's all tragic, especially Angus there as well, dying at such a young age. But at some point, you probably hit God, everyone around me is dying. And then you just realize, oh, yeah, because we're getting older. And again, not to desensitize the situation, but just a good example of that is that because this is a college basketball based podcast, is everyone in college athletics who's getting scholarship offers now that are like 15, 16 years old, they weren't even born when we were freshmen in college. So that's just a good example, I think, not to make light again of what you're saying, but a good example of like, we are getting a little older. We're not old by any means, but like, this is just going to become more commonplace. And unfortunately, with a lot of the stars, especially athletes and musicians and stuff like that we're so familiar with, it's going to become even more commonplace for people like you and I. So no, it's weird and sad that, this week in back-to-back years has been so kind of detrimental to the world of celebrities. But Yeah, little like the Angus one was pretty interesting. I didn't watch, or not interesting, but pretty, especially sad. I didn't watch
Euphoria.
Euphoria, but I saw him all over Twitter or the X, and and all over Instagram, and a lot of people I know watch that show. So yeah, pretty sad all the way around, man.
Well, especially in the college basketball world, if we pivot, right? The last couple of years since we've done this podcast, amongst the Titans that we've lost, we've talked about Lute Olson, John Thompson, Pete Carrill as recent as this past year, right? Bill Russell, obviously fitting that mold. I remember talking about Bill Russell we may have dedicated damn near the entire episode to Bill Russell last year. So I think the question now becomes, Taylor, instead of continuing each and every year, and it's going to be a habit that we're going to have to break, but I feel like every single year we continue to say, damn, we're getting old. Damn, we are old. I think the natural progression is, man, we're getting old. Now we're at the point of like, yes, we're old. And we obviously have that. We have the segment that we do sometimes, you're old as fuck. But when now, Taylor, do we just start to say, okay, we've come to grips with it? Like, when do we stop saying that? Oh man, we're old. Like, at what point? There's got to be some sort of point or age where we're saying, yeah, like it's not shocking to me that I don't know Carmelo Anthony's son, or at some point who's like, what we're going to be getting. I mean, we already got LeBron's. Who's like a mid that like Kawhi son at some point in the next couple of years. Like, yeah, that makes sense.
I think the oldest I'll feel is, as it relates to the sports world, is when one of Steph Curry's kids uh, gets it, because we know LeBron was like from our early high school phase, but like Steph Curry is someone we remember actively watching while we were in high school and then freshman year of college. I think that will be the point for me, and I know that's not going to come for a little while here, but that'll be the point where, okay, and where you and I have talked about this before, where you watch in a person's entire career, and a lot of that started like the Carmelos and LeBrons when we were in our youth, let's call it. But when people who didn't come into the league or into college until we were technically adults, like adults, then that's going to really start to make me feel old. But here's one for you. And a lot of the listeners, if not the very, very vast majority of our listeners, are our same age group here. And let me just throw out to everybody that we are closer to 50 than we are to have gotten our driver's license. So
That's
if you want to
terrifying.
feel old, then there's a good one for you right there. As a 33 turned 34, you just entered this world. This is a new thing for you for the last 26 days. But that's something I've been dealing with since this past November, is the fact that I'm closer to 50. I'm closer to the senior PGA tour than I am to learning how to drive a car. Let's put it that way.
I didn't need that. I for sure didn't need that. I'm just going to continue to base it off of like athletes' offsprings, but that is certainly incredibly, remarkably super depressing.
I have a complaint now that we are talking about that we're a little elder, and I'll get off this real quick so we can get on to more important stuff. But I've always been a really big rap fan, a hip hop fan, like for my entire life, right? And mixtapes. I was downloading every single mixtape off Dat Piff in college, and then previous to that, Napster and LimeWire and all that type of stuff, right? I do feel old now when I listen to, like, all the other pop music and stuff seems similar to stuff that we've kind of grown up with, all that type of stuff. Current rap music of rappers who are under 30 is completely a foreign language to me at this point. Like, Drake is still killing it, don't get me wrong, like those guys are, but people, like Travis Scott put out an album, and I'm not an anti Travis Scott. I'm a fan, I guess. Gen Z kids talk about Travis Scott like he's fucking like Mozart. It's like it's wild. I don't really understand that side of the young person world. I will say that.
Look, this is an open space. You can say whatever you want to me, maybe even in text. Just don't put that out on Twitter because you will get flamed. Or
Oh, I
even, I
know.
mean,
Listen, oh no, totally. Yeah.
even going into social media apps, maybe you can put it on Twitter, because I don't think Gen Z cares about Twitter. I don't think they care about Instagram. I think they look at that as maybe us coming up and being like, oh my God, you're on Facebook. And I still know some people who are hooked on Facebook. I got rid of the app, but it's kind of done a full circle. I've asked my nieces and a couple of like family members that are in eighth, ninth grade. I'm like, what are you on? And they're always on Snapchat for some reason. Obviously TikTok, like TikTok is the end all be all. But did you know that Snapchat has made a huge
Oh,
resurgence?
big time, big time. Yeah, I hang out a lot with one of my wife Danielle's younger cousins. Um, I actually go to bar trivia with every week, including in several hours tonight as we record this. Generally, those are my big happenings of the week. All they both happen on Tuesday nights. It's
We're
podcast
really
and
telling on ourselves on how old
podcast
we are.
and bar trivia.
Yeah.
But they're just all day long. Snap, 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 snap. And they include me. Like I give a fuck, in all, in all of them. And I'm like, how? Because Snapchat came out a long time ago, like over 10 years ago. 11, 12 years ago. And so it's funny. I feel like you're totally right, though. It did kind of like a peak when it first came out. Would have been one of our several senior years of college, I think.
No,
Right
it was
about there.
before that. I feel like
Okay, maybe right
I'm,
before that.
I'm thinking like 2007 or something.
Oh, no, 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 no.
It's after
Instagram
that.
Instagram wasn't even a thing until like 2011.
Yeah, wasn't
Yeah.
Snapchat prior to Instagram though?
Mm, I don't
Around that
same
era. Okay,
time,
fine.
same time.
2009,
Sure,
2010,
whatever,
we'll say.
whatever. Yeah, but it definitely. I feel like it definitely went through a lull like 5, 6, 7 years ago, and then now it's it's the uh Livy Dunny Dunn, whatever, however you say your last name, Cavender twin, whatever. It's those people of the world who are now like driving this thing all the way forward again.
Yeah. So I will admit one of my Patrick's nieces at a wedding, it was his brother's wedding. It was really funny. She actually took someone's phone and was doing Snapchat and put the Shrek face on everyone. So you can imagine all these drunk older people dancing with the Shrek face. I actually thought it was pretty funny. So she's doing it for good. She's using Snapchat. Well, the only other thing I'll say about age and feeling old and seeing all of these younger generations getting recruited and playing, I also think there's something to be said about seeing the dads or the moms uh, perform at such a high level for so long, right? You talk about LeBron James. We've yeah, we came up with LeBron James, but he's only slowing down just a little bit, right? Over the course of 23 years. Frank Gore was still getting NFL paychecks like 4 years ago. So when you said or when they said, yeah, Frank Gore's son is coming up, it's like, yeah, that kind of makes sense, I guess. Yeah, I feel old, but that also makes sense. That's why, like, yeah, Steph Curry, but I feel like Steph Curry is still going to be playing for another 7 years or so, unless he doesn't want to. So I think and Carmelo Anthony, towards the end of his career, he was bouncing around on different teams, but he had a very long career. I'm trying to remember some folks, or I think it's going to really hit us, or the sting is going to be out of us when we see someone who was pretty darn good, but only is in quotes because it's still a great career, but maybe like a 10-12 year career. And then it's like, oh, I haven't heard from their dad in quite some time. Now their kid is coming up.
Rashard Lewis, someone like that. Like,
Yeah.
yeah, right. So I will. Sorry, not to continue to rebut everything you say, but there is one thing that I am excited about in getting older. I am having a kid. This is my last month without a child in my life, so
That's insane.
that's kind of crazy, right? But I can't wait until I pick my daughter and her friends up from school one day when they're like, I'm gonna guess 13 or 14 when this happens. Hopefully, our podcast is still lasts that long, so we can come back to this and quote this. So timestamp this if you would, Sue. And they're gonna hop in the car and be like, "Dad, have you ever heard of Lil Wayne?" Or something like that. And I'm gonna be like, it's like a light will shine. I'll be like, "Yes, my time has finally come that I can impress my child that I know how to rap like 155-pound white dude." So yeah, that's the day that I'm looking forward to as I get older here.
Yeah, we heard about this in our music class. It's a really nice old school bop. No, I mean the thing. All you got to do, Taylor, is it's good to lean into it. You don't have to enjoy the new age music. This is what I say. You don't have to enjoy it. That's not a prerequisite. But you can't be like, why do you listen to this? Why? We had better music in my day.
Yeah,
It
I'm not gonna.
really
I'm not
sounds
a.
the same as like when our parents were listening to
Oh, I'm
us
not a.
listening.
Yeah, I'm definitely not a get off my lawn type of guy. I'm just saying that I fully admit that I am out of touch with that. And I guess I'll wrap it up with this is I think the point where you really understand if you've gotten older is when you're okay with the fact that you don't give a shit about what the people that are younger than you are doing. And as it relates to music specifically, I'm like, I don't. It doesn't bother me that I'm not up to date with like the newest NBA young boy song, if that's still his name. I think it's changed, but whatever. I don't even know.
Yeah, well, it's probably better because none of our kids are probably going to want us to enjoy and partake in listening with them. I remember, I don't know, my parents. I don't know how I got convinced them to do this, but they bought me the Closing the Curtains Eminem album when I was in like fifth or sixth grade, or whenever it came out. And my mom was like, you know what? I want to listen to this with you. I want to hear what we bought you, what he's rapping about. And obviously that particular album, I think like she heard the song Cleaning Out My Closet, which is to this day, like really, really aggressive, especially for a sixth, seventh grader. But she was like, what does he have to be so angry about? Like, what is he so morose? What is he so upset about? It's like, my mom was like, do you think this is your upbringing? Do you think you have it this bad? Like you're from the projects of Detroit? I'm like, no, mom, it's just what kids are listening to, and I'm enjoying it. Please turn the radio off and go back to NPR to appease dad. This is super awkward.
That exact album, we were in the car with Cody Hoxie's dad, and I'm not a proponent of littering when I say this, but we listened to 2 songs and he ejected it and tossed that shit out the window right away. That was a great memory right there.
Yeah. So Eminem, if you're listening to this, you were part of our. Obviously, he's part of our formidable years. But yeah, some 2 specific stories. All right, T. Let's hop now to some Big 12 talk. The big news of the last couple days: Arizona, ASU, and Utah potentially heading over to the Big 12. I'm going to hand this to you. All right, because you know me, the theater goers know me. I don't care about the speculation. I especially hate when there's a ton of speculation that has seemingly been going on for months now. We follow the beat reporters, we follow even national reporters, and it's always just, oh, there's an inkling that some movement might happen. There's this meeting happening, and Arizona Board of Regents did meet yesterday, which was a pretty sizable deal. But it's all speculation up until this point. Nothing has officially happened. I'm more of a wake me up when something actually happens. But Taylor, catch the people up, because I know you are far more in the weeds on this than I am.
Oh, I've got a lot of spicy takes on this, so I'll try and keep it down to a minimum here, so I don't ramble on for half an hour. So let's start with the speculation side of things. The 3 schools you listed, 2 of them are really much more speculatory than one of them is.
Is it the
U of
Arizona schools over the Utah
no,
schools?
no, no. U of A is about
ASU.
a 98% like they're gone. They're out of there, especially as the media deal that was relayed to the Pac-12 schools today or yesterday came about. Um, President Robbins from University of Arizona has had a kind of rule of thumb that he has where if X amount of games are going to be streaming, then that's not what they're going to go with. And the Pac-12 is it's the dumbest group of people. It's so funny because the Pac-12 has for a long time, and rightfully so in a lot of ways, um, really has pushed that they're a very academically forward conference. And with the likes of USC, UCLA, Cal, Stanford, Washington, especially, I'm not going to masquerade here like U of A or ASU or Oregon or Colorado. We're out here really, you know, the Harvards of the world here or anything like that. But they've always been big academically, or at least that's what they've pushed as part of the reason that they've stuck together for this amount of time. For his conference that really pushes the how highly academically forward they are, they must have the dumbest fucking group of people that runs the conference and the school specifically. It's such a strange, like, what's the way to put it? Like, just,
Dichotomy. Yeah.
yeah, thank you. Yeah, to just say, like,
That's
yeah,
my academic. Thank you to the
appreciate
Pac-12
it.
for getting
Appreciate
that
that.
word.
So, the Larry Scott, previous Pac-12 commissioner, moron, totally jacked the conference up. Every single person listening to this podcast, there's 80% of them don't have Pac-12 network, don't have any idea where they can find Pac-12 games, can't stream it, whatever. And if given the opportunity, wouldn't buy a streaming package specifically for the Pac-12 anyway. And that was with the LA schools still around, the two biggest brands of the conference, right? Um, it's been kind of a fun debate to figure out what the biggest brands of the Pac-12 behind the LA schools have been, and that's kind of been an interesting discussion. It's made me feel, as an Arizona fan, I don't say vindicated. That's not way to put it, but very good about how a lot of the things I feel about our institution that we went to school with are actually more true than what maybe people have always argued with me, have wanted me to believe. Um, that like this specifically is a very, very, very good proof positive that Arizona is a much bigger national brand than ASU is. The Big 12 doesn't give a single fuck about ASU. They really don't. They're only going to take ASU as a partner school with Arizona because Arizona's national basketball brand is what the Big 12 wants. And people can argue with me and say, well, this, that, and the other, and that's fine. Whatever. I don't care if 18 of the other programs we have in Tucson are worse than whatever your school you represent is. That's fine. But the big thing the Big 12 is looking for here is the fact that we have the seventh most valuable basketball program in the country. That's a big deal to them. And so fortunately, we host a college basketball podcast where we can focus on basketball things, right? So that's been kind of fun for me. And then it's also been really interesting to see that these other conferences view Washington as a much more valuable brand than Oregon. And I think that's kind of an interesting talking point as well. Oregon, I think the fear with them is, from what I've gathered, doing my own research, Subi, as some would say, is, Oregon's a huge football brand, but the fear with them is that when Phil Knight passes away, can they sustain? Right, because it's a blank checkbook, right? It's T. Boone Pickens with Oklahoma State, right? Can this program still continue to succeed at this level when they can't just call Phil and say, hey, do you mind if we grab another 100 mil from you real quick? So that's interesting. Washington is a far superior academic school to Oregon, so that's a big factor. But the key here is as it relates to the schools that you brought up: Utah, Arizona, and Arizona State. So as I understand it right now, and this isn't just like a quick roll through Twitter. This has been a long running thing. Is that pretty much what's going to happen is Arizona is going to leave to the Big 12, unless President Robbins fucks this thing all up, which is the only way it's not going to happen at this point. And the next folks in line that the Big 12 would want are Oregon and Washington as a partnership. And that's the only way they're going to take 16 teams at this current juncture, from my understanding. Now, if they pass, because they potentially have offer from the Big 10 upcoming as the Pac-12 falls apart, then that's when ASU and Utah would potentially fill in line. Now, the problem is it's going to be the same pie, right, that the Big 12 has. How much do they want to divide that, right? So do they want to divide it with ASU and Utah as well? In your opinion, Subi, are Utah and ASU big enough national brands that they're going to bring in more viewers than they're going to get money divided to them, if that makes sense?
That's a good question. I think ASU does have fans all over the country. I could make a joke about how they admit everyone, and that's why, but I won't do that because I'm a bigger person than that. Utah, I don't know about their brand. See, like I don't have a good sense or a good feel of brands, outside of the Southwest or the West Coast, maybe. But Utah, you can't argue with their track record and their success, especially in football, right? Everyone wants to de facto default go to Oregon in terms of them being the face of the conference in football. If it's not USC, which it is, USC is number one or was number one. But you had mentioned, who's fighting behind that. I could argue Utah for sure. They're in Rose Bowls. They win the conference. They're in New Year's Six Bowls. Now, Oregon does have a playoff berth with the Marcus Mariota team and a national title game berth, I should say, as well. But I think in terms of brands, I don't know. And it's about the dollars. It's what they can bring in. But in terms of winning and in terms of success, I think you're getting that with Utah. I think Washington, they've kind of fallen off a little bit, but their football program is pretty strong. Not necessarily sure what you're getting with ASU, though. And again, this is not being rude. I'm not trying to be a hater. You can't convince me of the two major sports in basketball and football that, I can hang my hat on Arizona State basketball or football being successful. I can definitely hang my hat on Kyle Whittingham. Oregon's going to have maximum maybe a 2 or 3 loss season in football, right? Arizona basketball is going to be a top 3 seed. And like you said, the 7th most valuable basketball program in the country. But in terms of, if you offered me ASU and Utah, right, as a package in one hand, right, you got this one box, and then in the other box, you offer me Oregon and Washington, I'm going to go with Oregon and Washington.
Oh, 100%. Yeah, 100%. So I think for the Big 12, it's if Oregon and Washington want to, more so than, because I don't think there's any conference in the country that wouldn't take those two schools, right? Like those are two name brand valuable schools, especially football wise, right? And Oregon's been to a Final Four in the last 5-6 years now as well.
Getting old, man. 7 years.
I know. Yeah, right. I had to think about that for a second.
Dylan Brooks has been in the league for a while.
All right. So here's the problem, though, as it relates to ASU, and this is going to come across as a little biased, but I am in a way boots on the ground here. I'm 5 miles from campus, so I get a lot of it here. Now, ASU has really tried to change their perception nationally over the last decade. If you notice, their sports have really taken a hit because of that as well. Their president, Michael Crow, is not a sports guy. He's not a sports guy. And it's the same reason why ASU doesn't have any real Greek life. But like they're trying to change their entire perception of this party school, and they are really, truly 100%. This is not hyperbole, a joke, anything like this. They're trying to align themselves with Stanford to become a large research institution. Okay. And that's great, right? But just because I want to be a 6'8" fucking NBA player doesn't mean I'm going to get there just because I want to be, right? And so sometimes it's better to lean into what you are than to try and become something that you are not. Because if you look at how the Valley or the Phoenix area feels about ASU athletics and how the country feels about ASU athletics, nobody cares about ASU athletics. Like they just don't. They are the 3rd, 4th, 5th top even today on local sports radio, because I specifically tuned in to see what local sports radio was saying this. Even today, they were the 4th topic of discussion about what is a monumental change in collegiate sports that's going on.
Was like the Suns jerseys leading?
Yeah. No, that's exactly what it was. And then like how Buda Baker's contract was going at Cardinals training camp on day 2, like, are the D-backs going to make an MLB trade deadline, which is fine. That's an okay story to cover first, trade, because the D-backs are good and, all that.
It is the trade deadline.
But Phoenix is a very pro sports town. And I think that's what makes a school, continue to sound like I'm biased, but I'm not biased in this situation because this is a true statement. Arizona has the entire Tucson market to themselves. That's true. Yes. Yeah. Right. Maybe 5 or 10% random other shit, some ASU people, whatever. But U of A also has 50% of ASU's market in Phoenix. 45% of 50, 60, somewhere in that range. So it's like ASU only has half of the Phoenix market, and that's it. U of A has half of the Phoenix market and their own kind of market in Tucson. So I think that's what makes it a little more attractive from a national brand standpoint, or at least from a conference branding standpoint, where they don't need 2 schools in Arizona because U of A will cover enough of the state for them where they don't have to bring in another school that may or may not ever be elite at anything they want them to be anyway. So that's how I think that's why I think U of A has been the choice here. And I'm not saying that I would be against ASU or Utah coming over with us.
Yeah,
I would get a little bit of satisfaction out of fully proving that they're a little brother and we're a big brother by saying, like, listen, these motherfuckers didn't even want you, okay? But we took you to we decided to drive you to school today. Come on, get in the back, whatever. So let me try and not ramble on so much here. So as it relates to what the Pac-12 is offering their schools currently, it's a $20 million per school with incentive, but mainly based, it's all Apple TV, which don't even get me started on streaming sports.
Yeah. And subscribers.
but especially streaming as your only option for
Mhm.
sports. Because think about this, right? And I get this. Okay, so Arizona is far and away certainly not the biggest football brand in the conference. Like we know that. Okay, we're bottom four, arguably, I would say, in football brand in the Pac-12. So when ESPN and ABC and Fox and everyone has to buy the games from Apple TV, which is likely only like one game per week, they're buying the Oregon game every week. They're not buying U of A, Oregon State in
Yeah.
Corvallis at 9 p.m. Like that's not going to happen. Okay. So you're going to have to get Apple TV if you don't have it. And it's not even offered in their normal cable package. You have to then, just like their MLS package, you'd have to then spend $100 on doing that. Well, we already have a big enough problem going out in public and trying to find Pac-12 network on TV. You think you go anywhere west of Valencia or like Casino del Sol in Tucson, they're going to have, or anything east, excuse me, of that anyone's going to have bought Apple TV for their bar so you can watch. No, you'll never be able to find a game of ours ever again. And that's what I don't understand. There shouldn't be an argument here because there's certain people in Tucson media who are pushing back on this. And I tell you what, there's never been a better example of how some people in Tucson want to play the victim all the time. And I think that's the only, like, they want to be the victim, because you got people who I'm not going to name that are members of the Tucson media who are like, we could go out there and be innovative and start a new trend. It's like, no,
Yeah.
fuck that. Like, no, we've already tried this and failed. And would you rather go tailgate in Manhattan, Kansas against the number 8 football team in the country? Or do you want to go again to Pullman in the winter, right? Do you want to go play Kansas at Fog Allen Fieldhouse every single year? I mean, there's a legit likelihood that, not every year, of course, because everything's cyclical, but there's a legit possibility that Kansas, Baylor, Houston, Arizona are the top 4 teams in the country, not the top 4 teams of the conference, the top 4 teams in the country, and they could all be playing each other at the same time. Why anybody would ever want to pass that type of opportunity up just blows my mind. So sorry for ranting for a while here. I have so many more thoughts on this, of course, but I just don't understand why anybody still in today's day and age. I know streaming is the way, but I think streaming has just gotten so convoluted and expensive and difficult that it's a walk back. And I did want to make another Gen Z comment if I could. In 10, 15 years, there's going to be some Gen Z genius that goes, guys, why don't we just put like a receiver on the top of everyone's house,
All the
and then
channels.
you can get all the channels and you don't have to switch between 8 streaming services, and everyone's gonna be like, oh my god, what a fucking great idea that is. And I'm not anti-streaming as it relates to anything else other than sports, but it just becomes so dumb now that you literally have to buy. We're on the stepping stones of having to buy like 5 different streaming services to watch college football on Saturdays, and that to me seems dumb as shit.
Yeah, it's almost like that Gen Z TikTok or whatever it was when they described a landline phone. So, what does this mean for Arizona? Right. I'm glad you mentioned all of the names. I know you personally love Manhattan, Kansas. I feel like it's your Cincinnati, Ohio, but I,
Whatever. Yeah, right.
no, well, I don't want listeners to be like, why the fuck did he say Manhattan, Kansas? I'd go with like Norman, Oklahoma, even Waco, Austin,
Well, but
right?
Norman and Austin aren't going to be there by the time Arizona gets
That's
there.
true.
So.
That's a good point. That's a good point. All right, then I will stick with Waco then. But no, hang on. I got to get someone else. Hey, maybe check out Morgantown, TC. You
Fort
know what?
Worth.
You might
Fort Worth.
Fort Worth. All
Yeah.
right. No, you know what? You might be right with Manhattan then. But what does this mean for Arizona? If and as it pertains specifically to basketball, because the Big 12 is coming off of their best year in so long. Looking at this landscape, man, Baylor, BYU would be super fun. Just going to Provo for a game. UCF I could do without. That's fine. But there's always bottom dwellers. Cincinnati, that actually helps for me. How did I forget Cincinnati? Houston, you had mentioned. Iowa State. Imagine playing in Ames, Hilton Magic. That'd be amazing. Obviously, Lawrence, Manhattan for basketball as well. I'd love to go to Gallagher-Iba, Oklahoma State. TCU's on the up and up, right? West Virginia, who knows what they're going to be doing the next couple of years in basketball, but that could still be a lot of fun. I mean, personally, for me, selfishly, and you had laid out all the great points for how this benefits Arizona, but personally, just for the ease of finding your game, for big time matchups, for not having to stay up super duper late, maybe for home games, but away games you don't necessarily have to do that, because you're right, that Arizona Colorado game is probably going to kick off at 10 p.m. Eastern Standard Time because nobody cares, nobody wants to watch it. And I mean, to your point, Taylor, about some of the media saying, "Well, we could be part of it, something innovative or something that's tried and true." It's like that Peter Griffin Family Guy sketch where he's like, we could choose the boat, but which is what we've always wanted. We've always wanted a boat, or we could choose the mystery box. That could be anything, even a boat, right? That's like we've struggled for so long and we've been the butt of so many jokes. Nobody cares about us. You want to talk about brands? Maybe I don't know brands specifically for all the college teams or all the universities. I know for a fact, Taylor, the brand of the Pac-12 is one of a complete and utter joke. It gets stuffed in the locker like Napoleon Dynamite every single day. It's pathetic. So I want some relevancy. Going back to how this helps Arizona as well. And you might disagree with me on this, but I'm 10 toes deep on this. And looking at that schedule and looking at those opponents, and again, this only pertains to basketball because we're going to get our shit kicked in football, but that's totally fine. I don't care. But as it relates to basketball, they're no longer, if they move to the Big 12, I would assume, and because I can't imagine the Pac-12 is going to be any better with some of these teams. Arizona is no longer going to enter tournaments with an inflated resume, with an inflated record. Now, why did it look? Last year was shocking, absolutely. But I think a lot of people bought in. I was ready to let people buy in on Arizona last year when I normally say no, we're going to choke. I was ready to let them buy in last year because of the out of conference schedule for the most part and beating UCLA twice. Now, this upcoming year, they have an insane out of conference schedule as well. And of course, they're a pretty damn good team. Fine. But how many times have we seen Arizona teams enter the tournament with 5 or 6 losses? And you're like, what is beating up on Oregon or Oregon State or Utah in their down years or Colorado? Does that really move the needle? When in reality, I think I'd rather have an 8 or 9 loss Arizona team that has been through absolute battles with the likes of Kansas and Kansas State and TCU and BYU and Baylor. I'd rather those battle-tested resume Arizona teams come into the tournament maybe as a 4 seed as opposed to like a 1 or a 2 after only being able to, I mean, we're probably not even going to have conversations about like if Arizona's a 27-28 win team in the Big 12, no longer, Taylor, do we have to have conversations about, well, if they win the Pac-12 conference tournament, then maybe they could be the 3rd 1 seed. No, you're pretty much a lock. And that is going to be nice. It's also going to be nice going into the tournament where anything can happen. I understand that. But going in with a little bit more of a hardened resume as opposed to, right, going to ASU or maybe a down USC or Cal, good Lord, who I love. I'm glad they hired our boy Madsen, but Cal and Stanford, enough. Like, get me some real opponents here in the Big 12. And you know what? Even if they don't suck, we're going to have that bias, which is great. That's all I've wanted.
Well, and I love that as a part of the new Pac-12 or Pac-9 media deal that it's going to be a subscriber incentives. So, for every 5 or 10 million more subscribers that they get because of this, the money will go up. We discussed on not so distant podcasts that Cal averaged 2,000 fans this last year, the lowest in like the history of high major D1. Do you think are there going to be 5,000 Cal fans that even pay for this? No, of course not. So now you're becoming completely reliant on the other schools, especially as the Arizona, Oregon, and Washington specifically. You're becoming reliant on the Oregon States and the ASUs and the Wazoos to help you make money by driving your subscriber base up. Hell no. No, those schools aren't going to bring in 1 million subscribers combined. Well, maybe ASU would, but you know what I'm saying? Like, those schools they're going to provide you with an extra, $500,000. I know enough people. I could go borrow $500,000 from someone. Like, if you're an institution of that size, you shouldn't be relying on some dude freezing his ass off in the Palouse to try and make you some money. Okay, that makes no sense at all to me. But I'm 100% with you on what you were just saying, though. Let's take if Arizona, for example, joins the Big 12 in 2024. Um, our out of conference schedule will consist of Duke, Gonzaga, Purdue, and I'm forgetting someone fairly major. Well, I think we're
Wisconsin.
Wisconsin. I think we're done with Tennessee. But
Yes.
anyway, so that's 4. Okay. And then, so let's say we split 2 of those. Okay. So that's 2 losses in the out of conference. And then you split your season series with Kansas, Baylor, Houston, and Kansas State, all top 15 teams in the country, right? So there's 6 losses. And then you're gonna lose a random one on the road to Oklahoma State or to Iowa State or even at home, whatever. So you're completely right. Like an 8-loss Arizona in the Big 12 is more valuable than a 3-loss Arizona in the Pac-12, like by a long shot.
How many times have we seen, looking at bracket breakdowns, a Big 12 team in Arizona's region with 8 losses, and you're like, they kind of scare me because
Oh,
they've actually
totally.
played real competition, right?
I
And
mean,
and another thing about recruiting, real quick, Taylor, all those venues, like Arizona recruits incredibly well in terms of basketball. I don't know how much better they can recruit, in just generally speaking,
sure.
right, over the years. But outside of Pauley Pavilion, if you're a recruit, is there anywhere in the Pac-12 that revs you up to play? Like, obviously, you're playing at home at McHale, but outside of Pauley Pavilion, what?
I mean, the problem with the Pac-12 is that it has such peaks and valleys in terms of what good arenas are. Like Heck Ed Pavilion at Washington is awesome when number 2 Arizona goes in there. But it's not awesome when 6 and 18 Oregon State goes in there. Like there's 4 people there, right? And so like at least in like the Big 12 at a Fog Allen, you know, all those type of places. Those fans are built in because they're only there to see their team. And that's what I really like about this as it relates to the fan of the Big 12. There's no passion in the Pac-12 compared to the Big 12
Oh,
in
absolutely. And
basketball,
that goes
in
into the
any
brand thing. Yeah.
in any sport, right? So we could go tailgate, and I'll just bring up Manhattan, Kansas again, just because that's the place I know the best of these schools. Manhattan, Kansas is such a great experience. And you would never, ever in your life be like, I'm going to move to Manhattan, Kansas. Hell no. No. Right. But on 8 Saturdays a year in the fall, it's fun as shit to be there because it's passionate. And I will say, as much as Arizona's football program sucks, they have a very, very good tailgating scene as it compares to how good of a football program they actually are. Now, much of that has to do with the weather. And so what I like about this from a football perspective, I'll get back on course here in a second, but think of how cool those tailgates, especially for the first 5 years in Tucson, are going to be. When those people from the Midwest, it's October, it's November, and they're like, what we should do is we should go tailgate in Tucson rather than tailgate in, Corvallis, right? And so, Sub, you and I and our good friend of the program, Ted Skroback, had a wonderful time when Oklahoma State came to town years ago.
Yeah, we
Yeah,
did.
a very, very memorable experience for many of us. And that could be every single weekend, essentially, in Tucson, because you just know that you're not going to get that that passionate fan base, even from like the Washingtons and the Oregons of the world. You're not going to get that in terms of like a travel base to your school. And so think about that too as it relates to basketball, right? Well, of course, people from Lawrence, Kansas are going to want to come to Tucson in February.
Yep.
Of course, people from Fort Worth are going to want to come over and catch some spring training games. Go to 2 basketball games in Tucson in March, and then head up to Phoenix and go to a couple spring training games. It's going to be a big boost, I think, to the schools, just the economic impact the school has on the community. So I think that's really cool. It's going to be a year-round type of thing, um, and I think it's an under talked about part of this. You're not ASU game coming down, you don't get any money out of that. No one's staying the night. No one's doing anything like that. The LA schools just aren't coming over here because they already have the same weather that they got going on over there. Cal and Stanford, nobody gives a singular fuck about traveling for their sports. Same with Oregon State. Same with Wazoo. I mean, yeah, there's no downside to this to me. And it's just, to me, it's exciting. And let me go back one second because you brought up recruiting, and that's where I was going to go with this is we might lose out a little bit. Well, I don't know. I don't know if we'll lose out on California recruiting because USC and UCLA aren't going to be even. They're going to be even further away than we are from where they're going to play most of their games in the Big Ten. So I don't think we'll lose out on that, but we're going to gain. And I'm not talking basketball. I'm just saying sports in general here. But I think it's going to open up a big Texas pipeline. Like we're now, hey, we play in your state 4 times a year now,
Yeah.
not just like, hey, we're close enough that you're a 2-hour flight. It's like, no, we're actually going to be in your state like 4 times this year. So like, and that's for recruits going to be even better than maybe even like the California or the Washington or whatever.
I think it could be a trade-off there. Now, if we think football, right? USC, UCLA might be losing out on some California. I don't think USC will because that's USC. But then you're also gaining potentially the Ohio's and the Michigans, right? Which are great football states. In the grand scheme of things, I don't know how great they are in terms of basketball. Ohio did produce arguably the greatest player of all time. Fine. But outside of that, like the Midwest, right? That's Big 10 country. Big 12 country, though, right? You had mentioned Texas. Texas can go up against California in terms of basketball players. I feel like Kentucky has a serious pipeline in Houston and Dallas. You think about Tyrese Maxey, that comes to mind. But I'm just none of this really matters actually for Arizona because we're just getting international players at the end of the day. Tommy Lloyd is just going to go international as it relates to basketball, but exciting stuff. I just hope they get it done. But the trepidation and the hesitation, Taylor, is all of a result of this speculation and the Pac-12 just being the biggest pain in the ass to work with, and also Arizona's ineptitude sometimes too. Okay, their leadership, I think you had mentioned that, isn't 100% reliable either. So I guess I'm not holding my breath, but for the love of God, if once I get that tweet from Thamel or any other major outlet saying that it is official, they're going to the Big 12, I'm going to be like Andy Dufresne after crawling through miles of shit, sitting in the pouring rain with his hands to the air, saying, thank God. And then when that first tip comes, we're going to be on the beach. You're going to be like Morgan Freeman walking up with the suitcase, and we're going to watch that first game together. And it's going to be great in the Big 12. So here's the last question I want to ask you, Taylor, before we move on. Is it going to happen? Are we getting this done?
From what I understand, which is pretty in depth, it's going to happen for Arizona in the next, I'd like to say, day. And the decision's probably already, that's the tough part about this. The decision's already been made. Like, it was probably already made well before today's announcement or yesterday's announcement of what the Pac-12 deal was going to be. Because nobody expected the deal to be good. Not a single person in the world expected the deal to be good. So the only way Arizona stays is if they have some kind of random blind allegiance to a conference that doesn't even really exist anymore. I mean, if USC and UCLA were still here, I'd be like, okay, like keep the entire 12 together. It still wouldn't have been my preference, but I could understand, you know. But now we're not even going to Southern California, which is where half of our alumni base lives. Like we don't even really have a home here in this conference either. So
Yep.
what there's no like the Pac-12, Pac-10, whatever bullshit of old is not even a thing at this point. And like I was telling a couple of friends of the programs today is that yeah, like every nostalgia is cool. Nostalgia is great. I'm a huge sports nostalgia guy, especially as like a Packers fan and whatever. Like all the history, McHale said all this like whatever sports nerd history guy, whatever. Nostalgia memories like stop and start at some point, right? Like people who are our parents' age remember when Arizona left the Western whatever the fuck it was, Western Athletic Conference with New Mexico and New Mexico State and Wyoming 40, 50 years ago. And previous to that, it was 30 years before it was the border conference. Like all of this stuff that we have that we view as like nostalgia is just going to start over because I'll bring up my daughter again. If I could be like, yeah, remember we've been going to games at Kansas for 25 years. Well, that's going to be that next version of the nostalgia and the connection and all of that type of stuff. So I think that part of it is overplayed a lot. As much as I like because we got to admit that like college sports as we know it is not even close to what it is even
No.
10 years ago. Like it's not. So we got to get over this uh, Rose Bowl pomp and circumstance. Nebraska, Tom Osborne. Like, I mean, that's
Yeah.
time in the world. Notre Dame and Ray Nitschke and all that. It's all over. That's all, unfortunately, because I like all that stuff. Unfortunately, it's all over. And I think some people are just slow to get to that point and understand that that's where we're at. And we got to do what's best for us and make sure that our brand and our school and the money maker and the real thing that makes us go as an institution athletically is the healthiest it can be. And for Arizona, that's basketball and that's joining the Big 12. And I think you got to just, even if you lose the rivalry with ASU,
Who
even if you lose,
cares about
which
that?
who gives a
Enough,
fuck?
dude.
I don't.
Enough.
I was trying to explain that to another friend of the program, Cody, last night. I'm like, dude, I can't even begin to tell you how much I don't give a shit
No
about if we
one
play ASU or not.
cares. Yeah.
No, I
Like
do not
nobody
care.
cares.
And in football, it's in football and basketball. They're both easy enough to schedule as an out of conference opponent
Yeah.
and
Well, the
flip
thing
it
is,
every year.
the thing is like, yeah, ASU has had some better, relatively better years than Arizona in football. But the thing that makes a rivalry great, if when the two teams suck, I mean, you have to be in football country like Alabama, or if one team sucks and the other's good, fine. That's kind of what it is like in basketball. But neither of the Arizona ASU football is. Neither of them are going to the Rose Bowl. Both of those teams are like barely scraping for any bowl whatsoever, right? I don't know. This past year, we got Kansas State in basketball, which was electric and it mattered and it meant something to seeding. I don't care about Arizona ASU. That's not a marquee matchup. People need to get like Taylor, I'm talking to the state of Arizona. Get it out of your head. Nobody cares. If you think people don't care about the Pac 12, even less people care about Arizona ASU outside of the folks that went to that school in Tempe and that school in Tucson. Nobody cares about that. And actually, it's funny. I was looking at the Big 12 conference, right? You look at a school like Cincinnati, maybe that's a pro town. Of course, you got the Bengals, you got the Reds. But the Cincinnati Xavier rivalry is huge. And I think more people care about that than they do Arizona ASU. So yeah, enough of the rivalry, man. That should be the last thing on our minds.
It's not a rivalry in basketball. Like in football, I could get if we wanted to play like traditional, the territorial cup. I get that, but that's very easy to schedule in, just like a lot of schools in the country do now. Iowa State, whatever, Texas and Texas Tech, all those schools will have to figure that out in the future. But it's not an uncommon thing. Football's easy. Just schedule one of your out of conference games each year is Arizona State, and you play it the Friday. You can keep it on the same date. It's a very common thing. But for basketball, Arizona's won 80% of the games over the last 40 years. Who gives a shit? Like, yeah, it doesn't. If their name wasn't ASU, right, and they weren't right up the street, there would never be even a consideration that we would continue to include them in our out of conference or our schedules every year. It doesn't make sense to beat the shit out of the same school over and over and over and over and over again for 40 years. So, yeah, I don't care if we play them in basketball. And even so, you still get 15 out of conference games. Schedule whoever's got the football game, the other school has the basketball game each year, and just flip it. It's not really that hard to figure out if we want to keep that going.
Look, just develop a rivalry with TCU after that tournament game. How about that? All right.
And I
TCU
and I
fans
would
probably mad at us. Let's develop a rivalry there.
and I would say I'd rather see us schedule UCLA
Oh yeah.
basketball and flip that every year than giving a single fuck about if we play ASU basketball ever again.
Yeah. UCLA is a basketball program that I dislike but respect immensely. And ASU, I just don't care. Football doesn't move the needle because my team sucks too. Both of our teams, that territorial cup football game is for the first one to like 5 wins. Nobody cares, man. Enough. And yeah, ASU won on a 3/4 length buzzer beater. Both of us ended up sucking, but Arizona won the Pac-12 conference championship. Whatever. I think what's getting lost in all of this is that the biggest plus in this move not would be not having to play at Kilkenny Court and Oregon's disgusting floor. So we just move over to TCU's disgusting floor, but Oregon's is the worst in the country.
So I will make one more note of this, and just because it's funny, and this goes to show you how out of touch. And I hate to say this because academics are really the point of all of these schools that we're talking about, right? So there's a live stream, or was a live stream that has already ended, about the Arizona Board of Regents meeting that was happening while we were on this shoot or recording this. I bet you the live stream usually gets like
Yeah.
4 people, right? Like, and there were like at one point hit over 2,000 viewers of this, and you could tell one lady of the Board of Regents had no goddamn idea why there were thousands of people watching this board. And I haven't been listening, obviously, because we've been recording this, but you could tell. And I don't think anything was even ever going to be discussed or voted on or anything, especially not live on streaming. But you could tell one lady was like, why are all these people here? You know? And it's like, yeah, that goes to show you who's really making all these decisions in college athletics. It's a bunch of people who don't even really understand like what's going on.
Yeah. Big news. We'll see what happens. Maybe this time next week, Taylor, because these things move fast. Maybe this time next week will be the latest and greatest member of the Big 12. Let's get on out of here these last 5 minutes. Talk about your boy. You've staked claim to him a couple of weeks ago, John Bowl. Now, you mentioned him in reference to verbally committing to Florida, which he did, but he has since committed to Ole Miss and Chris Beard. And it's funny, we were talking last year, I think, when Todd Golden got the job at Florida. We were wondering, how can this young guy who's a really good coach. I like what he did in year one at Florida. I think they'll be a tournament team this upcoming year, and he was obviously awesome at San Francisco. But when he first got hired at Florida, we were like, how is he going to adjust with the cutthroat recruiting in the SEC? Now, at that point last year, he didn't have to worry about Chris Beard, but now he does. And I'm going to tell you something, Taylor, without you getting mad, talking tournament teams, I would not be surprised, and I'm going to go out on a limb right now and say it, that Ole Miss and Chris Beard are going to make the NCAA tournament next year. I'm envisioning a Sean Miller type of renaissance year for Chris Beard. Now, Sean Miller unceremoniously fired from Arizona. Chris Beard, the same thing at Texas, obviously for different reasons, but took a year off, and now they're back. And now Chris Beard has a really solid team at Ole Miss that I think is poised to make the tournament. Here's what we're looking at here for Ole Miss. Expected to return Matthew Morrell, who is electric. I think he had a game where he shot like 8 of 9 from 3. He's a lot of fun. Jamin Brakefield and TJ Caldwell. Newcomers, Alan Flanagan. Why is that name ringing a bell? Well, he was a solid contributor at Auburn. So Flanagan is down there in Oxford. He's also got Austin Nunez from ASU. We are familiar with him. And then Musa Cisse. Musa Cisse's had a bit of an inconsistent career coming over from Oklahoma State, but those are some nice pieces, especially in a year one for Chris Beard, who someone who can coach. We've seen him coach without the name brand crazy talent. Remember that Texas Tech team that made it all the way to the title game with Moretti, Mooney, right? Jarrett Culver ended up being a lottery pick, but I really like this team. And now the addition of John Bowl, who, by the way, is Ole Miss's highest recruit in school history. I like them as a fringe team to make the NCAA tournament. And by the way, I said this about Rick Pitino when he got going and rolling at St. John's, which has culminated over the last couple of weeks. But at the very least, if you're a St. John's fan, the buzz is back, the juice is there. And now you don't know if this is 100% going to translate to the court, but you have something to be excited about. Ole Miss, I don't know how much they care about basketball, but the excitement is back now with Chris Beard because it just took him a few months to land the highest recruit in the school's in the program's history.
I mean, I think they got a big enough of a basketball following. I mean, the Marshall Henderson years were pretty
Yeah.
lighted there, I would say. So I think that they have a opportunity, and the SEC just has become a very good basketball conference as
Yes.
well, which is very helpful to this. And that's why I think that you are correct that they are going to be at minimum a bubble team this year because they're going to play a lot of tough teams, and they're probably talented enough to knock a couple off accidentally. Even if they're not supposed to win those games, right? Like John Bowles probably going to be good enough to accidentally have like a 28-19 game. Just I'm not saying that's what he's going to average, but at some point he's going to have a game with a stat line like that. I would agree with you. These are the tough situations as college basketball media members like ourselves are. Where when we talk about people like Chris Beard, we unfortunately have to separate the man from the coach, if that makes sense. Or I don't want to know, obviously we don't know exactly what happened in his situation. I don't want to speculate anymore on that, but just saying like, hey, this guy is a really good basketball coach. more than a really good basketball coach. I mean, if he can take Texas Tech to a Final Four, why can't he take Ole Miss to a Final Four? I mean,
That
are
might
there?
be it. I mean, maybe down the line. Down the
Well,
line. Who
yeah,
knows?
yeah, not this year, not this year. I'm just saying in as a general sense, like
Yeah.
it's
Oh
not
yeah.
like it's not Texas Tech certainly doesn't have more or less, opportunity to make a Final Four than Ole Miss would,
Yeah. Well, I mean, and
right?
we
Yeah.
just saw SDSU and FAU make the Final Four. So I mean, that's
Well,
just the name of the game,
right.
really. But yeah,
But
absolutely.
those schools didn't have a coach that had
Environment.
any type of pedigree
I'm
that
with
had
you.
already done that. Yeah, no, so
Yeah.
I'm totally with you. John Bowl, Chris Bowl, Bowl, and then the other bowls. Yeah, it's going to be a great. Let's put it this way: the talent that is now mixing in the salad bowl that is Ole Miss, that's going to come together quite well. Let's put it
Yeah,
that way.
well, you want to talk about mixing? Let's mix in the two topics we talked about today. All right, Arizona potentially going to the Big 12 and how that's going to inflate and be a better resume, and Ole Miss going to a Final Four potentially. I'll be willing to bet that no matter where Arizona goes, Ole Miss will get to a Final Four prior to Arizona. What do you think about that, Taylor? I started negative with the deaths, and now I'm ending negative.
I will say, Sub, you were less pessimistic about this Big 12 situation in Arizona as I expected you to be. I will say that.
What do you mean less? I've been waiting to get the hell out of
I
the
know, I
Pac-12.
know. I have to be the optimist, you have to be the pessimist,
That's
okay?
true.
So I'm happy that we were aligned on how excited we were and that you didn't throw in a little bit, well, yeah, we're gonna get our shit kicked in the Big 12 by real schools. It's like, no,
Well, I
okay,
did
we
say that
are.
about football.
Well, yeah. But
Oh, basketball, yeah.
that's a
No,
whole
no,
nother
no.
debate.
We can
But
hold our own in basketball, baby.
yeah. Well,
Develop
and
a
that's
rivalry with Houston too.
yeah, and maybe at some point the people who actually are from Tucson and are Tucson media members will realize that like Arizona's a big basketball program.
Yeah,
They still don't get that. And I'm not trying to say that we're Duke or Kentucky or I understand like there are certain national brands that just are what they are, right? And I understand that we are the tier that's right but right below that,
yeah. I'm fine with
right
that.
below that. But it's just kind of funny, man. You listen to two people from Tucson and Tucson media, they sound like I was joking that I will say this guy's name because fuck this guy is Greg Hansen. And that is like, I can't wait for his article to come out. Well, if Lute Olson wouldn't have been a good basketball coach, we wouldn't have had to deal with this Pac 12 realignment. We could have just stayed here and been like Wazoo and we could have just been happy with nothing, but Lute had to be good. So fuck that guy. He's such a loser that, that I'm sure there's a way he's going to find on hating on this. So that's what I'm excited about this entire thing is maybe Tucson folks and Tucson media members will realize that, hey, we actually have like a pretty good basketball program at Tucson. I don't
Well,
know. They
see,
should maybe slide over there and check it out sometime.
Taylor, you actually did a good job of rating me back just a little bit because I find some Tucson media members to be way too optimistic about this team sometimes, thinking that their shit don't stink. And so they will be taken down a peg or two, all right, in the Big 12 in terms of basketball. They're not gonna be expected to win the Pac-12 every single year,
Yeah, and I think
right?
that's a good thing. I think that's what's going to
I think
help
that's a
even.
great thing.
I think it's going to help even everybody out. Where it's like, hey, if we lost 7 games any of the previous years, it'd be like, wow, this team blows. But it's
Yeah,
like, now, hey, you lose 7 games and
I'll
six of
take
them
it.
are to top 12 teams. That's fine. Like that's how you get tournament tested.
Yes.
And that's another thing where it's like, yeah, you look at Arizona's bailing out on the tournament early over the last few years. Well, I would say that like just like you said, lack of competition and
Yeah.
testing in your regular season schedule is part of that. You go play the Big 12 tournament in
Yep.
Kansas City, and you're going to play 3 or 4 consecutive tournament teams to win. Like you've already had your little actual real tournament, and you're just not going to have those annoying like. I mean, UCF is the only throwaway basketball program in the entire conference. Everybody
You,
like
no, I
every
agree. Like
other team
Cincinnati's
could
down,
make
but yeah, they're good.
every other team could make the tournament in any given year. And UCF almost beat Duke in the tournament like 3 or 4 years ago. So it's not like they're even that
Yeah.
far out. Just
Aubrey Dawkins tipping.
give me more Taco Fall there. Where's Taco's little brother? But
Yeah.
again,
Well,
I'm back ranting about the same thing. So continue on.
no, we're done. We're done. Just get it done, please, President Robbins. I don't care who we go with. I don't care who we leave behind. I just want to go. I'm tired of being the butt of all of my friends' jokes about the soft. Nobody cares about the Pac-12 conference. All right. So we'll catch you next time here on Theater and College Hoops.